A small crowd of onlookers had clustered at the alley's dead end, 5 or 6 neighborhood loiterers lingering under the dim overhang, their postures lazy and cruel. They weren't rushing for cover from the storm. They were watching, taunting, circling someone trapped against the brick wall. A man, completely naked, soaked to the bone, his body streaked with fresh rainwater and dark, oozing blood. The frigid autumn rain poured relentlessly over Seattle's forgotten back alleys, hissing as it hit cold brick and pooling in grimy cracks across the asphalt. Thick gray mist hung in the air, muffling the distant hum of city traffic and wrapping the narrow passage in a suffocating, isolated quiet. Nell Carter rounded the corner at a hurried pace, her shoulders hunched against the downpour, every step driven by quiet desperation. She was already running late for the job interview that stood between her and eviction. Her worn portfolio clutched tightly to her chest, every spare second feeling like a fight to hold on to her crumbling stable life. But the second her eyes locked on the scene ahead, all her urgency evaporated into thin air. She froze in place, her boots hovering over a puddle, breath catching sharply in her throat. The small group of locals showed no mercy, their bored grins sharp and unkind as they surrounded the unnamed stranger pinned against the wet brick wall. No one moved to shield him from the rain. No one hesitated to amplify his suffering. Stripped bare of every layer of dignity, clothes, and protection, the man endured the freezing storm and the crowd's relentless harassment with a strange, unbroken resolve. Fresh, jagged wounds sliced across his broad chest, ribs, and shoulders. Dark blood seeping steadily to mix with the pouring rain, streaking his pale skin in violent crimson trails. Deep puncture marks marred his side, evidence of a recent, brutal attack that should have left him crumpled and helpless. Yet he did not fall. He did not beg. He did not bow his head in shame or fear, even as strangers leered, mocked, and filmed his humiliation for their own amusement. Look at this pathetic stray, a young man in a faded hoodie jeered, kicking a wave of muddy rainwater directly into the man's open wounds. Thinks he's too good to beg for change. Now look where he ended up. Another onlooker pulled out a smartphone, holding it high to record the helpless scene, snickering under their breath. No shirt, no shoes, no home. Just a broken freak with a death wish. Finally got what he deserves. The crowd murmured in agreement, their collective apathy heavier than the pouring rain. In a city that often turned a blind eye to street suffering, this targeted, gleeful cruelty was something Nell could not stomach. She had spent months scraping by on empty, drowning in late rent and endless work stress, barely keeping herself afloat. Logically, she should have kept walking. She should have prioritized her interview, her survival, her fragile future. But compassion flared hot in her chest, overriding every selfish instinct. Enough, Nell called out firmly, her voice cutting clearly through the rain and the crowd's taunts. She stepped forward, ignoring the nervous flutter in her stomach, her grip tightening on her portfolio. Leave him alone. All of you. The group snapped their heads toward her, their playful cruelty curdling into sharp annoyance. The hoodied aggressor took a threatening step forward, his jaw tight. Mind your own business, lady. This doesn't concern you. Walk away before you regret it. It concerns me when I watch a group of healthy people bully a hurt, defenseless man for fun, Nell retorted steadily, holding her ground. Put your phones away and leave. Now. A tense silence fell over the alley. The crowd hesitated, thrown off by her unyielding stance. And in that quiet pause, the battered man against the wall lifted his head. Nell's breath completely vanished from her lungs, his eyes were mesmerizing, rich, molten amber, glowing faintly beneath the gray rain haze. Sharp and unblinking. There was no agony in his gaze, no humiliation, no weakness. Only a deep, ancient quiet, as if he carried centuries of memories locked behind his wounded exterior. His features were devastatingly handsome, chiseled and sharp, untouched by the chaos surrounding him. Even bloodied, soaked, and brutally exposed, he held an air of quiet authority, a hidden strength that felt wildly out of place in this grim, violent alley. The sheer intensity of his stare unbalanced her. Her foot slipped on the slick pavement, and she stumbled forward, her portfolio flying out of her grasp. Papers, her only government ID, crumpled bus fare cash, her worn vintage Walkman, and her lunch scattered across the muddy, rain-soaked concrete. Her purse flipped open entirely, spilling her last few dollars into the puddles, her entire fragile livelihood spread out and vulnerable for the crowd to see. Panic surged through her. She dropped to her knees instantly, scrambling to salvage her belongings before the rain ruined her only job materials, before her last bit of money washed away. She had nothing left to lose, and the thought of losing her last chance at stability made her hands shake violently. The crowd laughed loudly, shifting their mockery from the injured man to her fumbling desperation. But before her fingers could touch her waterlogged papers, another pair of hands moved gently beside hers. The naked, bleeding man lowered himself slowly to his knees, every movement stiff and pained, his muscles straining against his fresh wounds. Despite his own agony and humiliation, he moved with deliberate, careful tenderness. He brushed rainwater off her resume pages, stacked her documents neatly, and tucked her Walkman and pen safely back into her purse. He did not glance at her scattered cash, did not attempt to take anything for himself, did not exploit her moment of vulnerability when every item was restored and secure. He lifted her portfolio and purse, holding them out to her with steady hands. "These are yours," he said. His voice was deep, graveled, and calm, completely unaffected by the crowd's lingering jeers. Nell stared at him, stunned. In a world where strangers preyed on weakness for entertainment, this broken man chose kindness. Overwhelmed by gratitude, she reached for her belongings. Then pressed every crumpled dollar she had left into his palm, the same money she needed for dinner and bus fare home. "Get something warm to eat," she whispered softly, his amber eyes softened. A faint, unreadable emotion flickering across his sharp features. He stared at her like no one had ever truly seen him before, like her small act of mercy was something foreign and precious to him. It was then that Nell fully registered the severity of his injuries. The deep stab wound in his side was still actively bleeding, dark blood pooling thickly beneath his knees. He was losing blood fast, growing paler by the second, his lips tinted blue from cold and trauma. Yet he had still stopped to help her. "You're dying," she breathed, horrified. He glanced down at his wound almost absently, as if the pain belonged to someone else. "It's nothing. It's everything," Nell argued firmly, standing tall and brushing off her damp clothes. She ignored the crowd entirely now, their petty cruelty irrelevant next to the man bleeding out in front of her. She would miss her interview. She would risk her rent. She would face the consequences of her choices. But she could not leave him here to die alone and abused. She held out her hand toward him, her expression steady and sincere. "Come home with me. I'll clean your wounds, stop the bleeding, and get you out of this rain." Finally bored and unimpressed, the crowd dispersed one by one, their cruel fun over. The alley fell into a heavy, empty silence, only the steady drumming of rain breaking the stillness. The man stared at her outstretched hand for a long, tense moment, his amber eyes unreadable. Nell offered a small, reassuring smile. "I'm Nell. Nell Carter." For the first time, a crack of vulnerability showed on his perfect, guarded face. He looked utterly lost, adrift in the cold rain and the unfamiliar city. Stripped not just of his clothes, but of every memory that made him who he was. "I don't know who I am," he murmured quietly, his voice hollow and faint against the storm. "I can't remember my name. My past. Anything." The rain never let up. It poured over the Seattle rooftops, sloshing through gutter grates and turning every sidewalk into a slippery trap, cold and unforgiving. Nell stood frozen for a long moment in the empty alley, staring at the nameless man bleeding at her feet, his amber eyes wide and vacant, stripped of every memory that anchored him to the world. Every logical voice in her head screamed at her to walk away. She had no spare money, no extra space, no margin to take in a stranger, a naked, injured, unknown man with no past, no identity, and a life-threatening stab wound, but she couldn't do it. Not after everything she'd seen. Not after he'd chosen kindness when the whole world had chosen cruelty. She slipped off her tailored wool coat, the only nice piece of clothing she owned, and stepped forward carefully. The fabric was warm from her body heat, thick enough to shield his bare skin from the biting wind and relentless rain. With gentle, tentative movements, she draped it over his broad shoulders, pulling the edges close to cover his torso and the worst of his bleeding wounds. The coat was far too small for his towering frame, stretching tight across his shoulders, but it was the only protection she had to offer. "Can you stand?" she asked softly, keeping her voice calm and steady, afraid to startle him in his fragile, disoriented state. He blinked slowly, as if processing her words took immense effort. The fog of amnesia clouded his sharp gaze, dulling that ancient, unreadable intensity she'd seen earlier. He tried to push himself upright, his muscles coiling with quiet strength, only to stagger violently the second his weight shifted to his legs. A low, ragged grunt escaped his lips, and his hand flew to his side. Pressing hard against the gushing wound in a futile attempt to stem the blood loss, Nell reacted instantly. Stepping in to loop one of his large, cold arms over her shoulders. Bracing her feet firmly on the slick pavement to support his weight. He was towering over her, solid and muscular. Yet shockingly frail in that moment, his body trembling from cold, blood loss, and unspoken agony. "I've got you," she murmured, anchoring him against her side. "Just lean on me. We're not far." He did not resist. There was no suspicion in his eyes, no wariness, only blind, desperate trust, as if her voice was the only stable thing left in his broken, unrecognizable world. Together, they stumbled out of the shadowed alley and onto the dim residential street. Rain lashing at their faces with every shaky step. Nell's tiny studio apartment was a 20-minute walk away. A cramped, outdated unit on the third floor of a creaky old brick building with no elevator. It was barely big enough for her alone, scuffed floors, a threadbare couch, a mini fridge that hummed non-stop, and a bathroom with a temperamental shower. There was no guest room, no extra blanket, no spare clothes. Nothing but the bare bones of the small, safe life she'd scraped together for herself. By the time they stumbled through her front door, the man's skin was clammy and ice-cold, his breathing shallow and labored. The wool coat draped over him was soaked through and heavy, saturated with rainwater and dark, dried blood. Nell's own clothes were drenched, her hair matted to her forehead, her forgotten interview completely erased from her mind. The job, the rent, the looming eviction, none of it mattered anymore. She kicked the door shut behind them, twisting the deadbolt locked with a sharp, decisive click, sealing them away from the rain and the cruelty of the street outside. The small apartment fell quiet, save for the patter of rain against the window and the man's ragged, uneven breathing. Sit down. Slowly, she instructed, guiding him carefully toward her worn fabric couch. He obeyed without hesitation, sinking down onto the cushions with a quiet wince. The second his weight settled, he tilted his head back against the wall, his Adam's apple bobbing as he struggled to steady his breathing. The amber of his eyes was dimmed, clouded by exhaustion and pain. Yet they never left her face, watching, studying, memorizing every small movement she made. Nell rushed to the bathroom, yanking open the cramped medicine cabinet above the sink. She grabbed every supply she had, antiseptic solution, sterile gauze pads, medical tape, and a roll of bandages she'd kept on hand since a past work injury. It was a basic, pitiful first aid kit, nowhere near enough for a deep stab wound. But it was all she had. When she returned to the living room, she knelt down in front of him, her movements quick but careful. Her fingers hovered hesitantly over the bloodied edge of her coat, not wanting to jostle his injuries. I need to clean your wound, she said gently. It's deep. If we leave it like this, it'll get infected. You're still bleeding. He stared down at her, his expression unreadable. You do not have to help me, he said, his voice rough and low, stripped of all pretense. I am nothing to you. A stranger. A burden. Nell paused, her gaze locking with his foggy amber eyes. You helped me first, she reminded him quietly. When everyone else was laughing at me, at your pain, you chose to be kind. Let me return the favor. A faint, almost imperceptible silence fell over him. He gave a small, subtle nod, granting her permission. Carefully, Nell peeled the damp coat from his shoulders, setting it aside on the floor to deal with later. The full extent of his injuries hit her then, sharp and unflinching. The stab wound in his side was ragged and deep, the surrounding skin bruised black and blue. Dozens of smaller cuts and scrapes littered his chest, back, and arms, evidence of a brutal, targeted attack. Whoever had hurt him had meant to leave him broken, helpless, and forgotten in that alley. What unsettled her most, however, was not the wounds themselves, but the faint, silvery, ancient scars crisscrossing his skin beneath the fresh injuries. Thick, faded lines that looked decades old enough to belong to someone who'd lived 100 lifetimes. Scars from blades, from restraints, from battles no modern street fight could ever leave behind. Nell's breath caught softly in her throat. Who are you? She pushed the question aside, focusing on tending to his wounds. She dabbed the antiseptic onto the gauze, wincing internally at how harsh it would sting, and pressed it gently to the raw, bleeding flesh. The man flinched only once. A subtle tightening of his jaw, no cry, no gasp of pain. His tolerance for agony was inhuman, almost terrifying. He held perfectly still, his gaze never straying from her face, as if the pain was trivial compared to the confusion swirling in his mind. Does anything feel familiar? Nell asked softly as she worked, pressing clean gauze over the wound and securing it tightly with medical tape. Any memories? A place, a name, a sound? Anything at all? He went quiet for a long time, his eyes drifting to the rain-streaked window, staring out at the gray city blurred by water. Only fragments, he finally whispered. Darkness. Chains. A voice whispering a name I cannot grasp. And, fire. A lot of fire. Chills skittered down Nell's spine. The words sounded less like a street attacker's doing and more like the echoes of something old. Something dangerous, something far beyond the quiet Seattle streets she knew once the wound was fully bandaged. She stood and fetched him a clean oversized hoodie from her closet, one of her old, faded menswear thrifts, the only clothing she had that could possibly fit his frame. She set it down beside him, along with a glass of cold water and a plain granola bar, her last bit of food in the apartment. Put this on, she said. Try to eat something. You've lost too much blood. He reached for the hoodie slowly, his large fingers brushing lightly over the soft fabric like he was unfamiliar with the simple warmth of clothing. As he pulled it over his head, covering his scarred, wounded body, Nell's phone buzzed sharply on the coffee table. Cutting through the quiet, she glanced down, her stomach dropping instantly. It was a rejection email from Morrison and Associates. Subject: Update on your interview candidacy. She already knew what it said. No need to open it. She'd missed her only chance. Her last shot at stability, at paying rent, at avoiding homelessness, gone. All because she'd stopped to save a stranger. Her shoulders slumped, a heavy wave of helplessness washing over her. She'd sacrificed everything she had left for a man with no name, no past, no answers. The man noticed the shift in her demeanor instantly. His head tilted slightly, his sharp senses picking up on her quiet despair. "You lost something because of me," he said quietly, no question in his tone, only quiet certainty. Nell hesitated, then let out a shaky breath, sinking down onto the edge of the coffee table across from him. "My job interview. It was my only chance to catch up on rent. If I can't pay, I get evicted." He stared at her, his amber eyes darkening with a heavy, unreadable emotion, regret, gratitude, and something deeper, older, more powerful. He lifted his hand, and for a heartbeat, Nell could have sworn his fingers glinted with a faint, impossible golden light. Hidden quickly beneath his palm before she could blink and confirm it. "I do not remember who I am," he said. His voice low and steady, a quiet promise woven into every word. "But I know this. I do not owe the world anything. But I owe you everything." Outside, the rain intensified, thunder rumbling low in the distance. Somewhere far below the city's quiet surface, something ancient stirred awake. A debt long forgotten, a curse long buried. Finally unraveling, and in Nell's small, dim apartment. The nameless man with amber eyes lifted his gaze. And she suddenly understood, she hadn't saved a stray from the alley that night, that she'd let a monster with no memory into her home. The word monster hung thick in the air, unspoken but palpable, mixing with the damp smell of rain, antiseptic, and faint iron blood lingering in the small apartment. Nell stared across the coffee table at the nameless man she'd pulled from the alley, her pulse thrumming loud and unsteady in her ears. Fear prickled at her skin, sharp and cold, yet it never fully drowned out the quiet gratitude still settled in her chest. He was dangerous, she could feel it in his ancient eyes, his inhuman stillness, the fleeting golden glow that had flickered across his fingers moments before. But he had not hurt her. Not once. If anything, he protected her when the rest of the world had chosen cruelty. The thunder rumbled again. Closer this time, shaking the thin apartment windows and rippling the raindrops streaking down the glass. The man shifted on the couch, wincing faintly as the movement pulled at his bandaged wound. He'd pulled her oversized hoodie fully over his frame now, the soft gray fabric swallowing his broad shoulders, making him look less like an ancient predator and more like a lost, wounded stranger. Still, his amber gaze never softened entirely, sharp, watchful, endlessly aware of every tiny shift in her expression. "What do you mean you owe me everything?" Nell asked finally, her voice quieter than she intended. She leaned back slightly, putting a small, safe distance between them, her hands resting loosely in her lap. "You're a stranger. You don't owe me a thing." He tilted his head, a slow, thoughtful movement, like he was untangling a truth buried beneath layers of lost memories. "Gratitude is not a choice for me," he said, his tone low and resonant. "It is a law. You showed me mercy when I had nothing, no name, no power, no defense. No one has done that in a very long time. A long time." The words settled heavy in the room, echoing the old scars crisscrossing his skin, the fragmented memories of chains and fire he'd whispered earlier. No ordinary person spoke of time like that, like decades were mere days, like human lifetimes were fleeting and trivial things. Nell swallowed hard, pushing her rising panic aside. She was already homeless-bound, jobless, teetering on the edge of ruin. The last thing she needed was to fear the only person who'd shown her kindness in return for hers. "Well," she said, forcing a shaky, calm breath, "mercy doesn't require repayment. I just couldn't leave you there to die." He did not look convinced. His amber eyes held hers, steady and unyielding. Like he could see every hidden struggle in her life, the late rent, the empty fridge, the endless overtime shifts that never quite kept her afloat, the loneliness she'd grown used to carrying alone. "You sacrificed your future for mine," he said simply. "That debt will be repaid." Before Nell could argue, her phone buzzed again on the table. It was not another email. The screen lit up with her landlord's name, bold and unmissable, and her stomach dropped. She'd been avoiding his calls for weeks, dodging the inevitable eviction notice she knew was coming. There was no more hiding now. No more interviews, no more last chances to scrape together the back rent. Hesitantly, she answered, "Nell Carter." The landlord's voice was sharp, impatient, final through the speaker. "I've given you more grace than you deserve. Rent is 3 weeks late. If the full amount isn't in my account by tomorrow morning, you're out. No exceptions. I've already got a new tenant lined up." Panic flared hot and desperate in her chest. "Sir, please, I just missed an interview, but I can find another job. I don't care about your excuses," he cut her off coldly. "Final warning. Tomorrow noon or eviction." The line went dead. Nell stared at the black screen, her fingers going limp around her phone. All the fight drained out of her in an instant. She'd worked tirelessly for 2 years, scraping by on minimum wage and freelance side jobs, clinging to this tiny, beat-up apartment as her only safe place in the world. Now it was gone. Just like that. A quiet, heavy silence fell over the room. The nameless man had heard every word. He did not need her to explain the crisis unfolding in her life. His gaze darkened, the warm amber fading into something sharp and unforgiving, a flicker of ancient wrath she hadn't seen before. Cold and unbridled. "He will not evict you," he said. Nell let out a hollow, exhausted laugh, running a hand through her rain-matted hair. "You don't know how landlords work. He's not bluffing. I have no money, no savings, no way to pay. I'm out of options. You have me." The words were quiet, but unshakable, absolute, like a promise carved into stone. Before Nell could question him, before she could dismiss his hope as empty amnesiac naivety, something impossible happened. Her phone vibrated once again. A bank notification. Confused and numb, she flipped the screen open. Her breath stalled entirely in her throat. A deposit had hit her account. A full, exact sum, every cent she owed in back rent, plus an extra month's payment, enough to cover her home for another 30 days. No sender name. No transfer note. No traceable source. Just a sudden, perfect, unexplained influx of money, appearing out of thin air. Nell's hands began to shake. She looked up sharply at the man on her couch, her eyes wide with shock and dawning terror. He hadn't moved an inch. He sat perfectly still, his hands resting loosely on his thighs, the hoodie covering every inch of his scarred skin. Yet his lips tugged upward in the faintest, knowing smile. "How?" she whispered, unable to finish the sentence. He did not answer her question. Instead, he tilted his head toward her phone, his tone calm and certain. "Pay him. Your home is safe." The room felt colder now, the rain outside quieter, like the entire world was holding its breath. This was no lucky accident. No random transfer. This was power, raw, unhuman power, bending the modern world to his will with nothing but a quiet thought. The fleeting golden light she'd seen earlier was no trick of the rain. No figment of her exhausted imagination. He was something far older. Far more dangerous than any street assault victim had a right to be. "What are you?" Nell asked again, her voice trembling, no longer scared for herself, but scared for the truth she was finally uncovering. "Truly. Who are you?" The man's smile faded. His amber eyes drifted to his own hands, covered now by the sleeves of her hoodie, as if even he was trying to grasp the missing pieces of his identity. For a long, stretched moment, he said nothing. The only sounds in the apartment were their breathing and the distant patter of rain. "I don't remember," he admitted at last, his voice softer, almost vulnerable. "But fragments keep coming back. Faster now, since you found me." He lifted his gaze to hers. And in his eyes, Nell saw it clearly, the clash of two worlds, lost innocence and ancient fury. Amnesiac fragility and unbound power. "I remember being hunted," he whispered. "I remember betrayal. I remember being chained in the dark for centuries. And I remember one rule, above all else." His voice dropped to a low, dangerous murmur, sending chills racing down Nell's spine. "Those who show me mercy, I protect. Those who harm me, I destroy." Before Nell could process his words, a sharp, sudden knock echoed through the apartment door, loud, insistent, and menacing. Not the soft tap of a neighbor or a delivery driver. A heavy, demanding bang, meant to intimidate. Her blood turned to ice. It was past 9 at night. No one visited her this late. No one ever came for her at all. The nameless man on the couch went perfectly, terrifyingly still. All trace of vulnerability vanished in an instant. His amber eyes flared bright, burning like molten fire in the dim room. And every muscle in his body coiled with predatory tension. "They found me," he said quietly, and in that heartbeat, Nell realized with blinding clarity, saving him hadn't just cost her her job. It had dragged her straight into the crosshairs of whatever ancient, ruthless enemies had hunted him down and left him for dead in that rainy alley. The knocking came again, harder, heavier, 3 sharp thunderous bangs that shook the thin wooden door on its hinges. The sound cut through the soft patter of rain outside like a blade, sharp and threatening. Stripping every last ounce of warmth from Nell's small apartment, her heart hammered against her ribs, fast and frantic. She lived on a quiet residential street, in a worn, low-rise building where neighbors minded their own business. Late-night knocks were unheard of here. No friends visited, no family remained, no work contacts stopped by unannounced. The only people who knew her address were her landlord and a handful of distant utility workers, none of whom banged like they were here to break the door down. The nameless man rose slowly from the couch. Gone was the vulnerable, disoriented stranger with fractured memories. Gone was the wounded amnesiac who'd stumbled helpless from the alley. In his place stood something cold, taut, and primal, a predator roused from centuries of slumber. His broad shoulders rolled subtly beneath the gray hoodie, every muscle coiled with restrained, lethal power. And the amber in his eyes blazed brighter, molten and unyielding. casting faint golden flecks across his sharp cheekbones in the dim lamplight. Even his breathing changed. Slow, silent, inhumanly steady. No trace of the pain that had lingered in his chest from the stab wound, no flicker of the confusion that had clouded his gaze only minutes prior. The hunted man was gone. Now only the hunter remained. "Don't open it," he said. His voice was no longer soft or rough with exhaustion. It was low, graveled, edged with an ancient danger that made Nell's skin prickle all over. "They are not here to knock." "Who are they?" Nell whispered, pressing her back flat against the coffee table, her fingers curling tight into the edge of the wood to steady her trembling hands. The full weight of her mistake crashed over her at last. She'd thought she was saving a helpless homeless man. Instead, she'd sheltered a fugitive of something older, crueler, far more terrifying than anything modern Seattle could conjure. "Who's hunting you?" He turned his head toward her, and for a split second, Nell saw it clear as day, layers upon layers of buried identity flickering behind his eyes. A crown of shadow, chains of cracked obsidian, a battlefield strewn with ash and storm. Visions not of city alleys or modern streets, but of forgotten realms and endless night. "My kind," he answered simply, the words heavy with unspoken tragedy. "The ones who betrayed me. The ones who chained me down and stole my name." Before Nell could press him further, the doorknob rattled violently. It twisted back and forth, hard and frantic, as if invisible hands were gripping it from the hallway, fighting to break the lock. The cheap deadbolt groaned in protest, the wood around the frame splintering faintly under the unseen force. Panic surged through Nell's veins, sharp and visceral. She'd locked the door. She'd bolted it tight. Nothing human could shake it like this, Nell. The man's tone dropped, sharp and commanding, cutting through her rising terror. "Step back. Go to the far wall. Stay out of sight." For once, she did not hesitate. She scrambled backward, her socks sliding across the cool hardwood floor, pressing her shoulder blades tight against the cold drywall. Her eyes never left his frame, watching as he stepped forward, positioning himself directly between her and the trembling door, an impenetrable barrier shielding her from the unknown threat outside. He moved without wincing, without faltering. The stab wound that had left him bleeding out in the alley, that had forced him to stagger under her support hours earlier, no longer seemed to hinder him at all. The human fragility was slipping away from him, fading fast with every passing second of danger. "Your wounds," she started, breathless. "Gone," he interrupted flatly. "Fear fuels me. Danger wakes what they tried to bury." The doorknob stopped rattling. Silence crashed over the apartment, thick and suffocating, far more terrifying than the violent shaking moments before. For 3 long, endless heartbeats, nothing moved. The rain pattered against the windows. The distant hum of a car passing on the street filtered through the walls, and yet the air felt dead, static, charged with unspoken violence. Then a voice drifted through the thin crack beneath the door, smooth, cold, honeyed with malice, too polished to belong to any ordinary stranger. "We know you're in here. Fallen One." Nell's blood turned freezing cold. Fallen One. A title, not a name, an ancient, mythic label that had no place in her ordinary, modern world. "You cannot hide forever," the voice purred, slow and taunting. "Your scent lingers. Your power bleeds through every crack in this mortal plane. We've tracked you across the veil. After centuries of bondage, you finally break free. Only to crawl into the home of a weak human girl." The man's shoulders tensed violently. His hands clenched at his sides, and a faint, golden-black aura flickered along his knuckles, fast enough that Nell almost missed it. Raw, untamed power straining to break free from the fragile mortal shell he'd been trapped in. "Leave her out of this," he said. And there was a quiet, deadly promise in every syllable. "She owes nothing to your war. She sheltered you," the voice hissed, dropping its playful tone entirely, turning sharp and venomous. "She chose mercy for a cursed outcast. By our laws, that makes her an accomplice. She dies with you." A low, rumbling growl reverberated in the man's chest, inhuman, feral, nothing like any sound a human throat could produce. The temperature in the apartment plummeted instantly, condensation fogging the windows, turning the warm air bitter and icy. Pieces of his lost past slotted into place in Nell's mind. Fast and terrifying. Chains. Centuries of darkness. Betrayal. A fall from grace. He was no ordinary supernatural creature. He was a castaway, a prisoner of ancient laws. A warrior stripped of his title and power, left to rot and die in the mortal world, and she, in her kindness, had broken their carefully laid cage. "Open the door," the outside voice demanded. "Surrender yourself, and we'll make her death quick. Resist, and we'll unravel her mortal thread slowly, painstakingly, while you watch." Nell's breath caught. She was not afraid for her life alone anymore. She was afraid of what this nameless man would do for her, because she could feel it building inside him, a storm of ancient wrath. Centuries of suppressed rage, a power so vast it could level her entire building to the ground. He was holding it back, clinging to the last shreds of his fractured humanity to protect her. But his control was fraying fast. The man tilted his head back slightly, his amber eyes blazing bright enough to illuminate the dim entryway. When he spoke, his voice was layered, dual-toned, half-human roughness, half-deep, otherworldly resonance that shook the walls. "You threatened the only soul who ever showed me mercy." The lock on the door snapped. It was not broken from the outside. It shattered from within, crushed by the invisible force of his unbound power. The door creaked forward an inch, a gap opening to the dark, empty hallway beyond. No one stood outside. No shadow lingered. No figure waited in the dim corridor, but the threat remained, thick and tangible. Hanging in the air like poison, the man stepped toward the door. And as he moved, another fragment of memory tore loose in his mind. Sharp and vivid, echoing loud enough for Nell to hear him whisper it under his breath, "My name." He muttered, his voice tight, struggling to grasp the words slipping back into his consciousness. "It starts with K." Before he could finish, a shadow surged through the door gap, black, liquid, alive, slithering across her hardwood floor like living smoke. Racing straight for Nell's feet, the hunt was no longer at the door. It was inside. The living shadow moved faster than any physical force had a right to, liquid, insidious, and hungry, sliding across Nell's polished hardwood floors and writhing black tendrils. It oozed past the couch legs, coiled around the base of the coffee table, and shot toward her pinned form in a single, vicious surge. There was no sound to its movement, no rustle, no hiss. Only a suffocating drop in temperature that stole the breath straight from Nell's lungs. Turning her exhalations into thin white fog, Nell froze against the wall, every muscle locking up in pure, primal terror. She could not run, could not hide. The shadow swelled as it drew near, branching into dozens of thin, thread-like tendrils that snaked upward, reaching for her ankles, her calves, crawling closer with unrelenting purpose. She did not know what this entity was, only that it craved her life, that it intended to wrap its darkness around her mortal soul and snuff her out entirely, before the shadow could touch her skin. A blinding burst of molten gold erupted between them. The nameless man moved in a blur, no longer bound by human speed or limitation. One second he stood paces away by the broken door, the next he was planted firmly in front of her, his broad frame shielding her entirely from the advancing darkness. The faint golden-black aura flickering around his knuckles exploded outward, blazing bright enough to flood the dim apartment, turning the gray rainy twilight outside the windows pale in comparison. The shadow screeched, a high, ear-splitting, inhuman shriek that vibrated the walls, rattled the window panes, and made Nell's skull throb with agony. It recoiled violently, shrinking back from the searing golden light as if it had been burned by pure fire. "Do not touch her." His voice boomed through the small apartment, layered with that ancient, dual-toned resonance, no longer restrained or muted. The words carried the weight of forgotten kingdoms, of centuries of suppressed fury, of oaths forged in starlight and battle. The floor trembled beneath their feet, and the loose items on Nell's shelves, books, small trinkets, potted succulents, shook violently. Teetering on the edge of collapse, Nell stared up at him, wide-eyed and breathless, watching as the last traces of his mortal fragility melted away completely. The gray hoodie stretched tight across his rippling muscles, his previously healed wounds vanishing entirely from his skin, erased by the surging power waking inside him. The faint scars that had crisscrossed his torso still remained, permanent marks of his centuries of bondage, but the fresh stab wound, the alley bruises, every trace of his recent suffering was gone without a trace. This was the truth of him. Not a broken amnesiac, not a helpless stray, but a being of unbridled, ancient power. Chained and crippled for longer than human civilization had stood. As the golden light flared brighter, burning back the encroaching shadow, another flood of memories crashed over him, violent, vivid, unignorable. The fog blanketing his mind ripped open, shattering the barrier that had hidden his identity since he'd woken broken in the alley. Letters and syllables clicked into place in his consciousness. A name long stolen, long buried, finally returning to its rightful owner. He drew in a sharp, ragged breath, his blazing amber eyes flaring to a pure, unearthly gold, and whispered the words like a prayer and a weapon all at once. "My name is Kael." The name hung in the air, thrumming with power, reverberating through every corner of the apartment. It felt ancient, regal, dangerous, a name that belonged on battlefields, on thrones, on the lips of enemies who'd feared him for millennia. Kael, the fallen one, the betrayed, the chained, the forgotten warrior finally unshackled. The shadow in the room convulsed violently at the sound of his true name, shrinking inward, its black form flickering and destabilizing. From the writhing mass of darkness, a translucent figure began to materialize, tall, gaunt, draped in tattered black robes that seemed woven from shadow and ash. Its face was featureless, a blank void of blackness, save for two pinpricks of icy silver light that served as eyes, burning with unhinged malice. It was no human, no mortal spirit. It was a wraith of the Veil, one of the ancient enforcers who'd aided in Kael's betrayal. One of the countless entities tasked with hunting him down should he ever break free from his chains. Kael, the wraith hissed. Its voice a chorus of overlapping cold tones, echoing from nowhere and everywhere at once. The fallen king returns at last. After 300 years of darkness, you dare reclaim your name. I reclaim what was stolen from me, Kael snarled, his golden aura pulsing in time with his rage. You and the others locked me away for crimes I never committed. You stripped me of my crown, my power, my memory, and left me to rot in the mortal realm. Your reign of lies ends tonight. The wraith drifted forward, hovering inches above the floor, its shadowy tendrils coiling and flexing with restrained violence. It tilted its featureless head, its silver pinprick eyes locking onto Nell, and a cold, mocking laugh rippled through the room. You waste your wrath on us when a mortal girl is your new weakness? How fitting. The great fallen warrior, undone by human mercy. They said compassion would be your downfall, Kael. They were right. Rage exploded through Kael. The golden light surrounding him burst outward in a shockwave, slamming into the wraith and sending the shadowy entity crashing back into the hallway. The walls of the apartment creaked under the force of his power, the door hanging off its frame trembling violently, rainwater streaming through the gap in thick, cold rivulets. She is no weakness, Kael roared, his power swirling thick and tangible around his fists. She is the only good left in a world that betrayed me. You touch her again, and I will burn every last one of your kind from the veil. I will unmake the laws you hide behind. I will turn your endless darkness to ash. Nell stared at him, her heart racing, every fear she'd held melting into a quiet, awestruck wonder. She finally understood the fragments he'd whispered earlier: chains, fire, betrayal, centuries of solitude. He was not a monster. He was a king who'd been dethroned, a hero framed for treachery. A powerful ancient being condemned to endless suffering for no sin of his own. The wraith recovered quickly, its shadowy form swirling back into solidity, unfazed by the blow. It fed on darkness, on hatred, on the lingering pain of the betrayed. Kael's wrath only strengthened it. Empty threats, the wraith sneered. Your power is still fractured, fallen one. Your mortal shell weakens you. You cannot sustain your full strength in this realm. We have hunted you across every plane. We will drag you back to your cage. And the girl who broke your bondage? She will die screaming for her misplaced kindness. With a sharp, violent flick of its shadowy tendrils, the wraith launched a barrage of black energy daggers straight toward them. The shards of darkness sliced through the air, sharp and deadly, aimed to pierce through Kael's aura and strike Nell where she stood against the wall. Kael moved instantly, shielding Nell completely with his body, his golden aura flaring into an impenetrable barrier of light. The dark daggers slammed into the shield, erupting into clouds of black smoke on impact, filling the room with the stench of burnt ash and rot. Every collision sent a ripple of force through the apartment, knocking books from shelves and sending Nell's small kitchen utensils clattering to the floor. The battle was unequal by mortal standards. A clash of ancient supernatural forces never meant to unfold in a quiet Seattle studio apartment. Yet Kael did not falter. Every blow he blocked fueled his growing power, every threat against Nell sharpened his resolve. You think this is all we send for you? The wraith shrieked, its form swelling larger, darker, more menacing by the second. I am only the first. The council knows you have risen. They gather their hunters now. Every Veil Walker, every cursed soldier, every loyalist who aided your betrayal marches for this mortal city. They will burn this world to the ground to ensure you never reign again. Kael's jaw tightened, his golden eyes blazing with unyielding resolve. He knew the truth the wraith spoke. His awakening had rippled across every hidden realm, tearing through the veil and alerting every enemy who'd spent centuries celebrating his fall. The hunt was no longer a small pursuit. It was a war, descending on Seattle, descending on Nell, but he no longer faced it alone. He glanced over his shoulder at Nell, his blazing golden gaze softening for a fleeting second, the ancient fury fading into quiet gratitude and fierce protection. Stay behind me. No harm will touch you. Not while I breathe. Nell pushed off the wall, her fear replaced by a quiet, unshakable courage. She had saved him from the alley's cruelty, from death and abandonment. Now she would stand with him against the darkness hunting them both. She would not be a helpless bystander, a weakness to protect. She would be his anchor. I'm not running, she said firmly, her voice steady despite the chaos swirling around them. You fought for me. Now I fight with you. The wraith let out a hideous, echoing cackle at her words. Foolish mortal. You do not know the storm you've stepped into. You do not know the power you've awakened. Kael turned back to the shadowy entity, his power coiling tightly in his palms, ready to strike. The final fragments of his memory slotted into place, the reason for his betrayal, the lies that stripped him of his crown, the truth that the council had feared enough to bury him alive. And as the rain lashed harder against the windows, thunder booming overhead to shake the entire building, the fallen king prepared to wage his long-awaited war. Lightning split the Seattle sky outside. A jagged white crack that illuminated the soaked city streets for a single blinding second. The flash seared through the apartment windows, casting Kael's shadow across the wall in a stretched, towering shape, no longer that of a vulnerable man, but of a monarch forged from storm and flame. The thunder that followed rolled through the walls like a distant cannon, vibrating the floorboards and rattling every loose object left standing after the wraith's initial assault. Kael's golden aura hummed to life, swirling thick and vivid around his fists, curling up his forearms like living fire. It no longer felt unstable or fractured. With every memory that returned, every oath he reclaimed, his power solidified, slow, relentless, unstoppable. The centuries of chains, the forced amnesia, the slow rot of exile in the mortal world were unraveling at last, burned away by the raw, ancient magic that had always lived within him. The veil wraith hovered in the broken doorway, its featureless black face tilted upward toward the storm, silver pinprick eyes glinting with cruel amusement. It fed on chaos, thrived on conflict, and it knew Kael's full awakening would unravel the fragile peace the council had built upon his suffering. That was why it had come first, not to kill, but to provoke, to alert the distant hunters, to buy time for the true army gathering beyond the mortal veil. You stand ready to fight? The wraith purred, its layered voice slithering through the tense air. Even with your power returning, you remain incomplete. Your crown is broken. Your loyalists are scattered. Your name is cursed across every realm. You have nothing but a mortal girl and a grudge. Kael took one slow, deliberate step forward. The floor creaked beneath his weight, not from weakness, but from the suppressed force of his magic pressing against the mortal plane. The temperature in the room spiked, chasing away the icy cold the wraith had dragged into the apartment. Burning through the lingering fog of shadow, I have survived 300 years of solitary darkness, he answered, his tone low and lethal. I have endured chains carved from my own stolen power. I have listened to the world forget my sacrifices and rewrite my truth. I do not need a crown or an army to wage war. I only need reason. His gaze sliced toward the wraith. Sharp enough to cut shadow, and you have given me more than enough reason. Before the wraith could retaliate, Kael struck that he did not waste power on grand displays or reckless shockwaves. This strike was precise, controlled, honed by millennia of battle experience. A thin, blazing blade of condensed golden light materialized in his palm, no larger than a dagger, but burning with the purifying fire of his old kingdom. He lunged forward, moving faster than sight, and drove the light blade straight into the wraith's shadowy core. The entity shrieked, a deafening, pained wail that warped the air itself. Its black form convulsed violently, tendrils of shadow flailing outward in blind agony, slamming into the hallway walls and melting through drywall like acid. Black smoke billowed from its core, thick and toxic, stinging Nell's eyes and choking the room with the stench of burnt void. You dare. The wraith howled, its form beginning to fray at the edges, unraveling under the searing pressure of Kael's royal magic. The council will tear her soul from her body. They will turn every mortal you care for into bait. You will watch this city burn. They will watch me burn first, Kael snarled, twisting the light blade buried in the wraith's core. A burst of blinding golden fire erupted outward. The wraith's shadowy body disintegrated instantly, dissolving into countless tiny black specks that fizzled out mid-air, erased completely from existence. The oppressive cold lifted from the apartment at once, the heavy tension in the air snapping like a broken cord. The broken doorway fell silent, the hallway outside empty and still. No trace of the supernatural intruder remaining, yet Kael did not relax. His aura dimmed slightly, receding back into his skin, but his shoulders remained rigid. His amber eyes sharp and scanning every corner of the room, every shadowed crevice of the windows and hallway. He knew better than to believe the threat was over. The wraith had told the truth, it was merely the scout. The first ripple of a coming tidal wave. Nell stepped forward slowly. Her legs still unsteady from the battle she'd just witnessed, her heart still pounding in her chest. She stopped just beside Kael, not behind him, holding true to her promise to stand with him. Her gaze traced the sharp line of his jaw, the unearthly gold still lingering in his irises, and she saw the weight settling over him now that the fight was done. Exhaustion, ancient and bone-deep. You killed it, she said softly, breaking the heavy silence. Kael nodded, his gaze still fixed on the empty hallway. It was a fragment of the Veil's enforcement. Easy to destroy. The others will not be so simple. He finally turned to look at her, and the battle fury in his eyes faded, softening into a quiet, weary gravity that made Nell's chest ache. The godlike warrior was still there. But so was the man who'd woken naked, bleeding, and nameless in the rain-soaked alley, lost, hurt, and starved for a single shred of kindness. The memories keep coming, he admitted. His voice quieter now, raw with the weight of his recovered past. Faster, sharper, every time I fight. Every time I protect you. Nell tilted her head, studying his expression. What do you remember now? Kael paused, his gaze drifting to the rain-streaked window, as if he could see through the mortal storm to the ancient world he'd lost. The thunder rumbled again, distant now, a low echo of the war to come. I remember the council, he began, his words slow and heavy, each syllable carrying centuries of bitterness. They were my court. My most trusted allies. I ruled the border veil, the space between mortal realms and the supernatural beyond. My duty was to keep the two worlds separated, to protect humans from predatory entities, to keep balance. A bitter, hollow laugh escaped him. I protected them all. And they feared me for it. Feared you? Nell repeated, confused. Why? If you kept the peace? Because my power was too great, Kael said. I was born with royal flame, the ability to burn void magic, to unmake darkness, to override the council's laws. They did not want balance. They wanted control. They wanted free reign to harvest mortal energy, to feed on human emotion, to expand their power without limitation. Nell's breath caught. Pieces of the puzzle clicked into place, explaining every cruel choice, every lie, every century of imprisonment. So they framed you, she whispered. They framed me for treason, Kael confirmed, his voice hardening with old rage. They claimed I intended to merge the mortal world with the veil, to drown humanity in darkness for my own gain. They twisted my protection into tyranny, my duty into greed. They rallied every disloyal soldier, every power-hungry entity, and they ambushed me in my own kingdom. His fingers curled into tight fists at his sides, knuckles widening. They chained me with my own flame, stripped my memories so I could never rally my loyalists, cast me down into the mortal world to live out endless, disjointed lives of suffering. They wanted me broken. They wanted me forgotten. They wanted me powerless enough that they could rule unopposed forever. Silence fell over the apartment, thick and sorrowful. Nell could not fathom the loneliness of 300 years of stolen identity, of endless suffering for a crime he never committed. The council had not just defeated a king, they'd erased a man. But you're waking up now, Nell said firmly, reaching out to lightly touch his arm, grounding him in the present. Your memories are back. Your power is returning. They can't keep you trapped anymore. Kael looked down at her hand on his arm, his amber eyes softening completely. I am waking up because of you. Your mercy cracked their spell. Your kindness gave me anchor. If you had walked past that alley that night, I would have died forgotten, broken, and false. Before Nell could reply, a faint, icy whisper brushed against the back of her neck, too quiet for human ears, too cold to be natural. One Wraith falls. 100 more rise. Nell flinched, spinning around to scan the room. Nothing moved. No shadow lingered. No figure appeared. Yet the whisper echoed in her skull, sharp and haunting, a supernatural warning seared straight into her mind. Kael's head snapped up, his aura flaring faintly in warning. He'd heard it too. They're watching, he said instantly. Not just from the veil. From the city. From every shadow within miles. They've marked this apartment. Marked you. He stepped back, his mind racing, already calculating their next move, their only chance of survival. We can't stay here. The next hunters will be stronger, smarter, organized. They will not attack one at a time. They will swarm. Nell's stomach dropped. Her small apartment, her only safe place, the only home she'd ever fought for, was no longer hers. It was a target. Where do we go? She asked, voice steady despite her unease. Kael's gaze hardened, resolve settling deep in his bones. He reached down, taking her hand in his skin warm, firm, anchoring, a stark contrast to the cold darkness hunting them. His golden eyes blazed with purpose, no longer just a wronged king seeking vengeance, but a protector fighting for the only person who'd ever believed in him. We run first, he said. And then we fight back. We find the remnants of my loyalists. We uncover the last pieces of the truth. And we tear down the council's lies, once and for all. Outside, the storm raged on, thunder rolling endlessly over Seattle. Somewhere beyond the veil, hundreds of shadow hunters stirred, marching toward the mortal plane, drawn by the light of a fallen king reborn. The war had truly begun. The storm outside reached its brutal peak. Torrential rain slamming against the windows so hard the glass trembled. And distant thunder boomed like the final toll of a war bell. Kael's fingers tightened gently around Nell's hand, his grip steady and unshakable, anchoring both of them amid the brewing chaos. Every shadow in the city stretched longer, darker. Alive with the stirring of veil hunters, dozens of corrupted entities, loyal to the false council, pouring through thin cracks between realms to snuff out the fallen king's reawakened light. There was no more hiding, no more running, no more waiting. The 300-year war Kael had been robbed of was finally coming to its end. Nell squeezed his hand in return, every trace of fear melting into unyielding resolve. She had lost her job, her stable home, her ordinary mortal life the night she'd chosen mercy for a broken stranger in the alley. But in exchange, she had gained the truth, a purpose, and a bond no ancient curse or supernatural war could ever break. She would not be a burden, not be a weakness, not be the mortal bait the council intended her to be. She would be Kael's anchor, Just as he had become her salvation, they're coming in full force, Kael murmured. His amber eyes sweeping the rain-blurred city skyline. His reawakened royal sight piercing the mortal veil to see the army of shadow gathering above Seattle's rooftops. The council fears my full awakening. They will end this tonight, or fall tonight. In the minutes that followed, every hidden fragment of his shattered memories snapped into perfect place. The final piece of his tragic story unfurled in his mind, clear and unclouded after 3 centuries of amnesic fog. The council's greed ran deeper than he'd initially recalled. They had not merely feared his power to balance the realms, they had coveted it. His royal flame, the purest void-cleansing magic in all the realms, was the only force capable of burning through their corrupted, soul-feeding power. As long as he lived and ruled with justice, they could never drain mortal energy freely. Never expand their tyrannical control over the Veil and the mortal world alike, their frame-up, his chains, his endless exile. His stolen memories, every cruelty was a calculated ploy to strip the world of its only protector, clearing the path for their eternal tyranny. And the final crack in their centuries-old curse spell? It had not fully broken until Nell chose to save him, selflessly and unconditionally, with no gain, no expectation, no fear. Human mercy, pure and untainted, was the one weakness the council's dark magic could never account for. The one force powerful enough to unshackle a fallen king. A deafening crash split the night as the apartment's outer wall shattered inward, shredded by a tidal wave of swirling shadow. Dozens of Veil hunters surged into the room, featureless wraiths and corrupted shadow soldiers. Their silver eyes blazing with murderous malice. Their dark tendrils coiling to snuff out every trace of Kael and the mortal girl who'd freed him. The air turned ice-cold, thick with the stench of void and decay. The entire apartment shaking on its foundation as the council's army descended, but Kael no longer flinched from the darkness, the fractured limits on his power shattered completely. His golden royal flame erupted from his body in a towering, radiant wave, flooding every corner of the room, burning away the invasive shadow cold and searing through the hunter's dark forms. No longer restrained by mortal weakness, no longer muted by amnesia or ancient chains, his true power blazed forth, bright, unyielding, righteous. The hoodie fell from his shoulders, revealing the faded ancient scars that marked his past bondage. Now glowing with soft golden light, symbols of survival rather than suffering, the shadow hunters shrieked in unison, their forms unraveling the second the royal flame touched them. Wave after wave of the council's forces charged forward, and wave after wave burned to harmless ash, their void magic no match for the king they'd betrayed and imprisoned. Kael moved with the grace and lethal precision of a millennia-old ruler, every strike deliberate, every burst of flame purifying the corruption that had festered across the Veil for 300 years, yet he never once let the battle pull him far from Nell's side. Even in the height of his righteous wrath, his first and only priority was protecting the woman who'd saved him. He wove a permanent golden barrier around her, unbreakable by any void magic, shielding her from every shard of shadow and blast of dark energy. Mid-battle, a towering, cloaked figure stepped through the wreckage of the wall, the council's lead enforcer. The same entity that had personally chained Kael 3 centuries prior. Its voice boomed across the storm-wrecked room, cold and triumphant, echoing with the weight of unchallenged tyranny. You burn our soldiers, fallen king, but you cannot rewrite your fate. You were always destined to fall. A king of mercy has no place in a world ruled by power. Kael's gaze sharpened, his golden flame flaring brighter. Mercy was never my weakness. It was my strength. It is why I protected the realms. It is why your cruel reign ends tonight. The enforcer lunged forward, wielding a blade forged from condensed void darkness, aiming to strike the final blow that would bind Kael once more. But this time, there were no loyal traitors ambushing him from behind, no hidden chains siphoning his power, no clouded memories blinding his judgment. Kael met the strike head-on, his golden light blade clashing against the void weapon. The collision sending a shockwave that ripped through the building and split the raging storm sky open above Seattle. In that explosive moment, every last lie of the council crumbled. The enforcer's true form burned through its cloak, a corrupted former loyalist of Kael's old court, one of the friends he'd once trusted utterly, one who'd traded justice for eternal power. The betrayal stung, but it no longer broke him. 300 years of suffering had hardened him. And Nell's kindness had healed the cracks in his soul. You traded everything for greed, Kael said firmly, pushing his golden flame forward to overwhelm the void blade. You helped them erase me, erase my kingdom, erase the balance we swore to protect. Now you reap what you sowed. With a final surge of purified royal magic, Kael unmade the enforcer's void power entirely. The corrupted entity screamed, dissolving into golden light, its centuries of darkness cleansed at last. The last of the invading hunters vanished with it, the shadow army scattered and destroyed. The immediate threat erased from the mortal plane, silence crashed over the ruined apartment, broken only by the fading patter of rain and their steady breathing. The storm outside began to calm, the thunder receding, the the jagged lightning fading from the sky. The war was not fully over, the distant council still lingered beyond the veil, weakened and fractured but not destroyed. Yet the hunt was finished. Kael's bondage was broken. His name, his power, his truth were fully restored. Kael turned at last to face Nell, his battle fury melting into soft, endless gratitude and quiet devotion. The golden glow of his power dimmed to a gentle warmth wrapping around them both. No longer a weapon, but a shield. It's over, Nell whispered. Stepping forward to rest her hand on his chest, feeling the steady, powerful beat of his heart beneath her palm. The fight for freedom is over, Kael corrected softly, brushing a strand of rain-dampened hair from her face. The fight for balance, for redemption, for us, has only just begun. All lingering loose ends settled into place in that quiet moment. The random alley encounter was no accident. The council's curse had always held a tiny, unbreakable loophole. Pure mortal mercy could shatter their bondage. They had grown arrogant over centuries of control, blind to the power of human goodness, and Nell, kind, resilient, unselfish Nell, had been the missing key they never accounted for, the money that had saved her rent, the power that had protected her, the memories that had returned to Kael. Every small, impossible moment had been the spell unraveling, the old wrongs beginning to right themselves. The man who'd been left naked, bleeding, and broken in the rain was never astray. He was a king reborn, and she was his savior, his anchor. His new purpose in a world he'd once thought cruel and irredeemable. Kael knelt slightly, his amber eyes holding hers with unwavering sincerity. A quiet promise woven into every word. 300 years I suffered in darkness. 300 years I believed the world had forgotten me. But you found me. You saw me, not as a fallen king, not as a broken stranger, but as me. I will spend every remaining lifetime repaying that kindness. I will protect your world, your life, your peace. No council, no shadow, no ancient curse will ever harm you again. Nell smiled, soft and steady, her heart full. She had lost her ordinary life, but she had gained something infinitely greater: truth, purpose, and a love forged from storm and shadow, betrayal and redemption, spanning centuries. Outside, the rain stopped entirely. The clouds parted, spilling faint moonlight over the quiet Seattle streets, illuminating the city the two of them would now protect together. The veil's cracks sealed shut, the shadow hunters gone, the council's reign of fear broken and weakened beyond repair. Kael's past was no longer a chain. His lost name, his broken crown, his buried memories, his centuries of suffering, all were closed chapters, healed at last. And ahead of them lay a new future, balance restored between realms, justice waiting for the remaining corrupt council members, and a life together built on mercy, loyalty, and unbreakable bond. The fallen king had risen. The long war was won. And in the quiet moonlight of a storm-scoured city, two souls bound by fate and kindness finally found their peace.